Good to have you back. This is Environmental Intelligence, episode 28 for April 27th, 2026. New week. Here's what's changed across Canadian environmental jurisdictions. The BC Energy Regulator has cited LNG Canada for non-compliant black smoke flaring at its Kitimat facility. At the same time, a new peer-reviewed study directly links wastewater injection to a record sequence of earthquakes in the Peace River region, contradicting earlier regulator assessments. These developments sharpen focus on enforcement trends for major industrial facilities and on the technical defensibility of induced seismicity risk registers for upstream oil and gas work. Practitioners should also note early signals for an elevated wildfire season and continued provincial pushback on cumulative effects assessment. British Columbia enforcement action against LNG Canada highlights ongoing compliance gaps at major industrial facilities in the Northeast. A peer-reviewed analysis directly links waste injection to 3 significant earthquakes in the Peace River region, contradicting earlier regulator findings. Practitioners should also note continued provincial pushback on ecosystem protections and early wildfire risk signals for summer 2026 field programs. Watch BC regulatory enforcement trends and induced seismicity implications for upstream oil and gas clients this week. The BC Energy Regulator determined LNG Canada engaged in non-compliant black smoke flaring at its Kitimat facility. This finding triggers mandatory corrective actions and potential administrative penalties under British Columbia's environmental management framework governing air emissions at LNG operations. Previously, operators relied on self-reported flare data with limited real-time verification. The new compliance order underscores increased scrutiny of visible emissions events that exceed opacity and duration thresholds. For consultants supporting Northeast British Columbia LNG and midstream clients, this directly affects air quality management plans, emission inventory reporting, and audit readiness for facilities under EMA authorizations. Practitioners should review current flare monitoring protocols against the regulator's findings. They should prepare for possible expanded stack testing or continuous opacity monitoring requirements. Next steps include tracking any subsequent penalty decisions or authorization amendments that could set precedent for similar facilities. What this signals is a measurable shift away from reliance on operator self-monitoring toward verifiable, visible emission compliance in the Northeast. In practice, this means your next site visit to a comparable facility should include a fresh look at flare gas recovery system uptime logs and camera calibration records. British Columbia Greens, former NDP cabinet ministers, and environmental advocates criticized the provincial government for weakening ecosystem safeguards in its recent Earth Day messaging and policy decisions. The criticism targets reduced emphasis on cumulative effects assessment and habitat protections under the Environmental Management Act and Forest and Range Practices Act. Consultants working on major project permitting or CSR Schedule 2 site remediation should anticipate tighter scrutiny from stakeholders. They should also watch for possible policy reversals that could alter baseline environmental impact requirements in upcoming applications. This ties directly into the broader conversation about how much weight regulators will place on cumulative effects in the next round of authorizations. A new peer-reviewed study attributes a record earthquake sequence in the Peace River region directly to wastewater injection by the energy industry. The findings contradict earlier British Columbia regulator assessments. They strengthen the technical basis for linking injection activities to seismic events under provincial oil and gas regulations and the Environmental Management Act. Operators and their consultants should reevaluate seismic monitoring plans, injection pressure thresholds, and risk registers for disposal wells. They need to align with the updated science before the next regulatory review cycle. This development is worth watching because it gives both proponents and regulators a clearer evidentiary line when future injection permits are challenged. Lower mainland observations of unusually warm and dry spring conditions, combined with below-average snowpack and emerging El Niño signals, point to elevated wildfire potential across British Columbia this summer. Practitioners supporting interface developments or contaminated sites in the wildland-urban interface must accelerate fire-smart assessments. They should update emergency response plans to reflect heightened drought and fire behavior forecasts. Early preparation of defensible space prescriptions and groundwater monitoring contingencies for post-fire runoff events is advisable. The Gulf of Panama experienced complete absence of seasonal upwelling for the first time in 40 years. This removed the nutrient pulse that supports regional fisheries and carbon cycling. While outside direct Canadian jurisdiction, the observation provides a measurable analog for projected changes to coastal upwelling systems along British Columbia's coast under continued warming. It carries implications for Fisheries Act authorizations and marine habitat offsetting calculations. Coastal practitioners should incorporate updated climate projections into long-term risk assessments for sites near sensitive marine receiving environments. Off-grid communities in the Amazon are rapidly adopting solar panels paired with battery storage to achieve 24/7 power, replacing diesel generators. Canadian remediation contractors working on remote mine closure or northern contaminated sites should evaluate similar hybrid renewable systems. These systems can reduce long-term power costs at pump and treat or soil vapor extraction installations. The approach offers a practical template for lowering Scope 1 emissions on remote projects while maintaining reliable remediation system uptime. The U.S. Trump administration is moving to reunify offshore energy regulators previously split after the Deepwater Horizon incident. Canadian practitioners supporting cross-border or federal IAA reviews for offshore projects should monitor whether this signals potential alignment or divergence in safety case and environmental assessment expectations. This applies under the Federal Impact Assessment Act and offshore petroleum board regimes. Early review of any forthcoming U.S. policy documents is recommended to anticipate effects on harmonized standards. If you are working on Northeast British Columbia clients with similar combustion equipment, review the LNG Canada flare compliance findings against current air permit conditions. Update induced seismicity risk assessments for Peace River region disposal wells to incorporate the new peer-reviewed injection linkage data, accelerate fire-smart planning and post-fire runoff monitoring templates for British Columbia wildland urban interface contaminated sites ahead of the elevated 2026 fire season. Pull meteorological data sets for any recent flaring events at facilities you support and prepare defensible root cause narratives. Brief upstream oil and gas clients on the regulatory implications of the Peace River seismic study before next injection program approvals. April 30th marks the close of the BC Energy Regulator comment period on proposed updates to flaring and venting reporting requirements. Provincial wildfire preparedness briefings from the BC Wildfire Service are expected between May 1st and May 15th. Update client interface plans accordingly. Federal IAA guidance on cumulative effects and climate change adaptation for marine projects is anticipated between May 1st and May 15th. May 31st remains the standard deadline for many BCEMA annual air and effluent compliance reports covering 2025 operations. Now, speaking of that LNG Canada flaring notice, there is a nuance in interpreting flare compliance data under variable meteorology that I wish more junior practitioners would internalize early. You land at an LNG or sour gas facility in northeast British Columbia the morning after a regulator issues a non-compliant black smoke flaring notice. Stack camera footage shows opacity excursions lasting longer than permitted during a period of low wind speed and temperature inversion. Under BCEMA and the facility's air discharge permit, opacity and sulfur dioxide limits are expressed as both instantaneous and rolling averages. Yet meteorological covariates often determine whether an exceedance is enforceable. Experienced practitioners pull concurrent meteorological data from the site's on-station tower. They cross-reference it against dispersion modeling assumptions used in the original permit application. Inversion height, wind shear, and relative humidity directly influence plume grounding and visible smoke persistence. Regulators increasingly accept these factors in root cause analysis when supported by contemporaneous data. The key insight is that compliance is rarely binary. Facilities with robust flare gas recovery systems still trip limits when upset conditions coincide with stable atmospheric layering. Review the exact permit language on minimized flaring and best efforts to avoid visible emissions. The most common mistake is submitting a corrective action plan that attributes events solely to process upset. That approach omits quantification of the meteorological contribution or demonstration that flare minimization technology was fully engaged. The fix is to embed real-time meteorological triggers into the facility's environmental management system. Maintain a defensible data set that links each excursion to specific operating and weather conditions before the regulator requests it. Before we wrap, watch for any early indications on how the BC Energy Regulator intends to apply the updated seismic study to pending disposal well applications. That's environmental intelligence for today. If this briefing is useful to your practice, share it with a colleague and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're back tomorrow. Have a productive day. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.